to university for a year, and that's when I learned study habits, because everything just didn't come like that, right? And also how to write tests and that, but I needed to support my son, so I applied for and I got a job as a teacher's associate at the Lease Cutterite Colony. So I moved up to Marshland.
Hold on a second. That's fascinating. But university and generally in school, can you draw some parallels between, first off, what elementary school was then versus what it is now? And also university, because university, even, like, I went back there on the weekend and it's been 4 years and it's drastically different. And it's just like, I assume there was no computers or anything weird.
No, there wasn't any computers. The biggest difference in elementary school now is when I was a kid, if you got into trouble at school and your parents found out, you got trouble at home too. They supported the teacher. The teacher was an important part of that community, as was the minister. They were they were the authorities, the experts. They weren't questioned. As a teacher, there's no respect, a lot of disrespect, being questioned all the time.
You're talking now?
Yes. And the parents are overly involved most of the time. If you tell them their kid did blah, 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 well, it's your fault. I mean, there's still the regular families, right, that are involved in their children's education and appropriately, and they support you, and you have discussion. I would say that's the 60% of the parents, but then there's the other parents who are negative and overly involved and make life quite difficult. As a teacher, you're supposed to professionally recommend, encourage people to go into that profession. I would not in good conscience do that. No, I wouldn't want my children to be a teacher.
So you're in university, you went there for a few months, and then you got a job.
I got my first year of university done, which was the general arts studies, right? You didn't go straight into the College of Education. You went in on the second year if you were accepted in. I was accepted in. But in the meantime, I went and I got a job as a teacher's associate at the Hutterite Colony. And the teacher I worked with was a real loser. He was right-wing conservative religion. At recess time, he'd go walk among the fields and pray, and like, he was bizarre to work for. But the Hutterites treated me so well. I ate lunch with them, the teacher didn't, and so there'd be 2 rows of tables, one where the men sat and ate and one where the women sat. And they had a table at the front for me alone, facing everybody. And that was their sign of respect. So when there was baking days, they'd send home buns with me. They could not comprehend a single woman with a child. They just felt so sorry for me. So they'd send over little Hutterite boy kids' clothes for Sean, which I never put on him. Little black pants and plaid shirts.
Knowing skater Sean, that is amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
But they would send home buns, and I can remember one time I went away to visit Kathy, I think in Yorkton, and I got back late Sunday night, and there was a truck in my driveway of Hutterite men worrying about when I was going to get home and what would they do. Like, the whole idea of me being alone, they just couldn't but they were so good to me. The second year working, I was shared between the Lease School and the Hutterite School, but the teacher at the Hutterite School wouldn't even talk to me. I didn't even know when the days off were. And if they were different from the Lease School, I missed pay because of that. So I ended up quitting. I asked for a raise in April, didn't get it, I quit. And I can remember the director asking me, why, and I wasn't going to rat out anybody. Hey, it was quiet, no, just need to move on. So again, I had to move home. And
are you going to university at the same time?
No.
As you do this?
I took, night classes that were offered in the community, because Teachers at that time just needed a teaching certificate, but if they wanted a raise, they had to get their degree. So the college would offer night classes in the community for teachers to get their degree. So I did do that. I did some night school that way. Took a couple of my second year classes. So then I moved home and I worked for Uncle Ed for a couple of days. That wasn't going to work for me. And
And were you still teaching in Leask?
No.
That's such a far drive. Like that's...
No, I moved home. I
So
quit.
were you living in Leask when you were teaching in Leask?
When I was in EA, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because yeah, that's a far drive.
Yeah, so I moved home. And this was 1981, and the big movement was for women in the workplace. Kind of like reverse discrimination, right? Women were discriminated against, so now you have to have a quota. And the quota was women or disabilities, right? And so I knew a man that worked at the mine, and I don't know if he put in a good word for me, but he told me they were hiring potash mine. So I applied. I'll never forget the interview. I go in and the guy's saying, kind of, sussing me out. And I said, well, yeah, I had a boyfriend that was a farmer. Oh, then you know about machinery. And I'm thinking, hell no, I don't. But it was a really well-paid job. Like it was $9 an hour plus benefits. And it was 2 days, 12-hour shift, a day off, and 2 night shifts. So I was never going to be home more with Sean than that.
If that was good pay, what?
That was in
normal pay?
1980. Oh, $4 or $5 an hour.
That's wildness.
Oh, and it was like women didn't get paid that kind of money. I had waited tables and cooked in restaurants. I worked at a restaurant, fancy restaurant in town here that burned down when I got hired at the mine. And cooks made more money than waitresses, but it still wasn't that good. So I was a single woman. So I took the job and I was really scared because they'd hired another woman, and I remember the guy saying, she's going to be great. You guys are going to fit in really well and all that. Well, I was scared, and I remember asking Ed's best friend, Orville. I said, I'm scared. I don't know how this is going to go. I'm going to go underground. I'm going to be with all men. And he gave me some of the best advice I think I have ever had. He said to me, Donna, those men will treat you exactly how you act. If you act like you need to be respected, they'll respect you. But if you're acting like you're over, they're going to treat you that way. So I said, okay. So I meet the other woman, and she's got a snake tattoo on her arm that says, Butchie loves Jocko. I'm thinking, oh, she's kind of tough. She was very sweet, though. So we had a week of training on surface, and then we went underground. On the second day of going underground, she quit. She couldn't do it. And so then they hired, so I'm on my own, I'm working underground. They hired 3 more women that worked at the bar that the men used to go to. Well, and they're putting little pigtails in their hair for their hard hat, and they have written makeup on to go underground into the dirt. I just didn't understand that. They didn't last a week. Then they hired another woman that ended up staying as long as I did. I was there between layoffs off and on 5 years. And her name was Sam, and tall redhead. But they would do things to try to make us quit. So we never worked at the same site. She went to one end of the mine, I went to the other. And they put me with this man that had gotten hired days before me, so he had more seniority. And him and I didn't see eye to eye. We'd play Kaiser at coffee break. You weren't supposed to play cards underground. And if I made a wrong play, he was really tall. He'd reach across, grab me by the neck, and just shake me like a rag doll. So I didn't like Kaiser much. But anyway, one time, my miner operator was a young guy. My age was really good to me. Everybody else but this guy was a turd. And they knew he wasn't treating me well, but they wanted me to quit because they couldn't fire me. One time this fellow was walking along, I could see his light bobbing, and I had this huge metal gun that used to help put stuff into the roof. And I came through and I got him right between the eyes. Knocked him down, he's rolling around. And then there's a big to-do. The miner operator came and said, You had enough finally. And I said, no, it was an accident. It was an accident. Next day, instead of going underground, we got upstairs. And I thought, oh, I'm going to lose my job. But no, he was getting an award for wearing his safety glasses when I accidentally nailed him between the eyes. And guess what happened? I didn't work with him anymore. He got moved to a different site underground. And then it was just our usual group, and we got along really well. We ended up working together for a year underground. I got into this rhythm. It was awesome. But then potash prices dropped. I got laid off. So every time I got laid off, I would get unemployment. I'd go to university. So I did that off and on for 5 years. But every time I went back to work at the mine, I had more seniority. So the next time I went back, I worked on the surface in the mill, and I got laid off. Then I went back and I worked at the loadout. By this time I have enough seniority, I'm driving heavy machinery. And the other girl's still there, and they're still looking for reasons for getting us fired. And we used to drive these massive trucks that had ore in the back. And we'd race to see who could get the most loads through ditches and just gunning her, right? Holding on to this big truck. And in the sign it says, in case you roll over, hold on to the steering wheel. And I used to laugh thinking, I can't roll these things. So I'm in the shed unloading, and my load shifts, and it rolled. My truck rolled, and I'm like this. My supervisor comes along and goes, Donna, let go of the steering wheel. So then I came out. They had to get a crane to come lift the truck up. I thought, great, I'm gonna lose my job. But the week before, a man had done the very same thing, and they didn't give him any consequences. So they couldn't for me. Because the union had come out the first year I worked there and said, if you do anything to make these women's life miserable, we will not support you. You're done. So everybody was very careful. Sam, the other girl, she accidentally hit something and put 3 holes in the radiator. Well, no man had done that, so she got 2 steps. 3rd step, she'd have been fired. So I always had like a little angel there. And then when I got to loadout, it was a good crew again, and it was an easier job because I was driving machinery. By this time, I wasn't shoveling all the time. But some of the men on day shift were pretty abusive. And by this time, I'm married to your dad. And one time I went up.
Hold on a second. Where'd you guys meet?
Okay, so we go back to that.
Okay, so you're 25?
When we got married.
Okay.
I was 25. So when I was 23, I worked in a restaurant here, and Dad and his best friend used to come in for coffee. So I got to know them that way. And then Dad said, he was married at the time. He said, I'm starting a ball team, a slow pitch ball team. You want to play? I said, sure. So we played ball that year together. Every weekend was a tournament, and we played in the city. It was a great time. Had a pretty good team too. And then in the meantime, that was a year, and Dad in the fall of 83, left his wife. And we still knew each other. I was still living at home. And then in January of the next year, he asked me out. January 26th. He asked, in 1984, to ask me to go to a dance. And so we went, we had a really good time, and then he never asked me out again. By this time I'd moved to Delisle in a suite, basement suite, and when he left his wife, he lived down the street, so he'd come over and play cards and stuff, but that was that. So I thought, oh, okay. So in April, he decides maybe he wants to like me again. And he comes over and he says, I have a problem. I said, what's that? And he goes, I think I love you. And I said, that's not a problem. And so we were together ever since. Shortly after that, he asked me to marry him. And I said, no, I wasn't ready for that. I was really off marriage. And then again, by this time we were living together in the fall. In September, he asked me to marry him again. And I kind of knew if I didn't say yes, that I would lose him. So I said, okay. So then we moved into a house together and life was good, and I wasn't going to set no wedding date. I was doing my internship as a teacher in Saskatoon. So Dad worked in the city at BF Goodrich. So I would drive in with him, drop him off
And
at
you're
work.
25, still working at the mine as well?
Yes.
Okay. So
Whenever
at the
I
mine,
get-
doing internship.
When I got laid off, I went to university. So I'm doing an internship in the city. I'm laid off from the mine till December. And Dad's like, yeah, okay, we should get married. Oh, God, okay. So we got married exactly 1 year from our first date. We got married January 26th. We were going to get married in February, but our minister wasn't available then. But we had our honeymoon booked for February to go to Puerto Vallarta. So we got married in January. And I've been called back to work at the mine now. So back I go, and I'm working there. And then that's when I went to an area in the mine that was my responsibility for my shift. And in the dirt were lots of very derogatory things about me. And my boss was with me at the time. And I came home, told Al. He says to me, you don't need to put up with that. Quit that job. Never even occurred to me, right? So I quit. I quit that job. And I finished. I went back to university because he was so supportive, right? Financially, in any way possible. I went back to university and I got my degree. By this time, I was driving school bus. So I would drive school bus in the morning, go into my classes, come home, drive school bus again, then do family stuff with Sean and Dad. And then at 2 a.m, I'd get up and do my assignments, like my essays and my reading. Then for a couple hours, then I'd go back to bed for a couple hours and sleep. And that's how I did my last term, graduated. Then I graduated in 1988 from university, and I was scouted for a job in California, teaching special needs. And I went to the interview, and it just didn't fit. Like, Dad was always willing. Yep, we'll move to California. That works, no problem. You know, he was always very supportive. But it was in Los Angeles, in the inner city school, and not very well paid. Teachers in the States are not very well paid, so I turned it down. So I still drove school bus, and I substituted. And I kept getting temporary contracts. And so I had to give up my school bus run because as a teacher, you have to be available after school to meet the parents, blah, blah, blah. And then after 6 years of temporary contracts, I got my permanent contract at Delisle Elementary, and I was so excited. I subbed at Vanscoy and Pike Lake schools as well.
And how old were you when you got your contract?
You were born, so I was 31. So I had you when I was 30, and Donovan when I was 33. Sean was 13 at the time when you came along. So, and then it wasn't a full-time position, it was a job share with Joanne. She taught the mornings, I taught the afternoon. Because she was on a back-to-work thing, and she wasn't strong enough to do a full day. So we did that for years. And then she went full-time and I went full-time. Yeah. So for childcare, I had Laura across the street. But by this time you were also in kindergarten when I went full-time, so it was all good. For childcare, and Dad worked up north at the time, didn't you? When Donovan was 2? No. Okay.
And were you living in this house at this
Oh
time?
yeah. We moved into this house a year after we were married, 1986 in October.
Oh, well.
Yeah, and what had happened was construction was slow, and Ed had his business, had no work. So Mom and Dad bought this little house, and he added on to it, and then they were going to flip it and sell it. And what they did to us was they gave us a rent-to-own option. So paid so much a month in rent, and then when we had enough for a down payment, we went to the credit union and bought the house. And they sold it to us for $42,000. So that was win-win for everybody, right? For Uncle Ed, for Mom and Dad, for us too. Because I don't know if we'd have gotten a house. I guess eventually we would have. So anyway, and then so I had my.
So,
Go
just,
ahead.
I know home ownership is a hot topic right now because of home
Yeah.
prices. It's insane. What was it like at that time? Was it like you would have got a house eventually? Like
Oh,
I know
yeah.
everybody does. It's not
Yeah,
crazy.
it wasn't out of reach. Same as going to university. It wasn't out of reach financially. I got student loans, I got bursaries. I didn't have to get paid back, and I worked part-time, and I was able to go to university. I don't think that a person could do that now.
How much did university cost? Like, how much would your degree cost, or did it cost? At the
Maybe
time?
$12,000 to $15,000 for my 4 years. Yeah.
That's
But
crazy.
I'd been in a car accident, and at that time you could sue the insurance company of the person that you got in the car accident with, who was at fault. And the same lawyer that got my divorce handled that. And his sister-in-law phoned me up and she goes, Donna, because people thought I died in the crash and all this. And she phoned me up and she goes, Donna, I don't know if you know this, but you know, you can get money from that car accident you were in. Because I was in the hospital for a week. And I said, okay, so I phoned up Derek and he handled it. And I got a significant amount of money, I think about $3,000 paid for a year of university from that. So that was a blessing as well. So by the time I graduated, I only had about $1,500 in student loan.
Well,
Yeah, and we
So-
paid it off like right away quick.
$3,000 is 2 courses right now.
Oh, that's awful. Yeah, you know what? It's becoming universities for the elite. But yet, to get a decent job, you have to have an undergraduate degree, which is basically like a grade 12 was back in my day. You know, if you had grade 12 and you got hired by SaskTel or SaskPower, they educated you. They, you know, like my friend got hired, he became an electrician, all on SaskPower's dime.
Yeah. And like, it doesn't, you know, you go to university and then you get this license. So it's like, you know, the licensing body is asking for the degree.
Yeah.
And for me, like, particularly like to get my physiologist license, like I was ready for that 2 years in university and they were like, no, can't write until you get your degree. So I had to pay another 25 grand to go be able to get this license it's a game, but
It's
whatever,
a
I
money
can rant
grab.
about it
It's
forever. become
become a real elitist thing, right? It's a money grab. Everything costs. Back in my day, yeah, home ownership was you could do it.
what made you guys settle in Delisle? Because that is something when I'm like, I became an adult and I'm like, cool, time to find a job. There's one job in Delisle.
Yeah.
Why do people live
Yeah.
here?
Well, it was a small community. It was good for family, and it was where I grew up. I knew everybody, and where Dad had lived. So, I mean, we did consider, there were points in our married life that Dad was without work, and we considered moving. Like, one was to Yukon, Faro, Yukon. One was to the States to work with Uncle Jim, but neither job panned out. It's not that we were unwilling to move, just no big opportunities showed themselves. Dad ended up getting jobs, you know, and I don't know how we did it, but we always seemed to make through. Either he was working or I was working, or sometimes we were both working, but we always managed to do okay. And driving to the city wasn't the thing it is now. Like, Dad carpooled with 2 other people, so it wasn't so pricey to drive. You know, driving to the city was totally affordable, whereas now, yeah, you know, so there's that about it. That's different for everybody now. What else? Raising my sons. Yeah.
So we've been ripping pretty good here.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you go, I'm going to be a teacher,
Yep.
and then you go and you set upon that path.
I almost quit twice.
And I
It
gonna
was
ask
so
about
hard.
that time in life where you're transitioning into adulthood and everything shows itself, and there's these certain opportunities, and you know, like you're still growing as a person, and you
Yeah.
don't know if those are for you. I find it interesting that you became a teacher, and then you were a teacher.
Yeah. And it was the best job I ever had. I was made to be a teacher. I loved it. It was my identity. Yeah, I loved being a teacher. And I was good. Yeah. And I also loved, is it being a parent now about my children?
Yeah. What was it like when we were young?
So Sean was 13 years older, so it was like raising two families. Dad and I were married 5 years before you came along. I love him. I want his babies. I wanted a family. He always knew I wanted a family. He'd had a vasectomy with his first wife. He got it reversed. And then 2 years go by and there's still no baby. And so then I had exploratory surgery. There wasn't really a reason why we couldn't have a baby. But I went to a fertility expert in the university, and I took pills to make lots of eggs, and we did get pregnant with you. And I remember going for the interview, or the ultrasound, and the doctor's doing, it goes, oh, there's only one baby. And I look at him and I go, yeah. And he goes, well, that's like we were expecting triplets now. I had no idea, right? So you were like, ta-da, we have a baby.
I am a miracle.
Yeah, yeah, you are. And you were just the sweetest little baby. I can remember I had to have a planned C-section that time, but you decided to come early. You came 2 weeks early. Sean was a week early. You were 2 weeks early. And Donovan was 3 weeks early. So I was still driving school bus because I was going to drive up. You were due in March. I was going to drive to the end of February. And I got up during the night and I let Dad sleep because I didn't want to wake him. And I'm sitting on the couch and I'm just, oh, something's wrong with my back. And then I thought, hey, I started timing them. They were contractions. So I phoned my sister-in-law, Janet. She drove school bus at the time. I said, I can't drive bus. And will you come watch Sean? Sean went over there, or Grandma came up here for Sean. And I went in and I had you. Dr. Velnichuk was your doctor. And I was insisting that Dad was going to be in the room. But I was so far into labor, like there's a point where your mind kind of goes in. And I was at that point. And I can remember telling Dad that I thought it was a really bad idea to have children. We should just go home now. Get me my clothes. We'll go home. Well, he had no patience for that. And then the doctor came in right away. And the cool thing was I was able to be awake for your birth. I wasn't for Sean. And that hurt me. But for you, I was awake and just had an epidural or a spinal tap, something like that. And Dad was standing right here all nervous. And then you were born and it was a boy. Because we didn't know at that time. Like it wasn't that you knew what you were having at the time. That wasn't there. So we named you after an uncle that was special to Dad.
Okay, this brings me to something interesting.
Okay.
It's like, of course, my name's Ruben. You guys called me Ben my entire life.
Yeah.
And that is a thing in my childhood, like Uncle Bob and like all these people that have nicknames that are not their name.
Yeah.
You don't really see that now. What was the deal with that?
Yeah. I don't, I know there are guys in town that have nicknames from high school, like
I have
that,
to edit that.
yeah, you know, and they still have that name. Well, you know, people have feelings, right? And they get offended if you have nicknames now for them. But I always wanted to call you Ben. And just the fact that you were Reuben, it was kind of cool, right? Reuben, Ben. And so, yeah, you were named after an uncle that Dad was really close to and loved. And he died, the uncle died when Grandpa, you were 9, right? About that. And then you have Dad's name. So at that point we thought, well, we can't have children without help, right? So I was just going to have to be content with my 2 sons. So time passes, I'm working and carrying on and everything, and all of a sudden,
Are you taking care of me when I'm a kid?
yes,
Am I? Okay.
yeah, I was stay at home. Oh, I had a daycare. I babysat other people's kids, so I could be home with you.
Huh.
Yeah, so I babysat for families, and I did that for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden I'm not feeling good, and I go to the doctor and I'm pregnant. And I'm thinking, well, how can this be? You were almost 3 by this time. So along comes Donovan. And I remember being pregnant with him. I wanted a girl so bad. And I said to my mother-in-law, who had 3 boys, they said, Mom, didn't you want to have a girl? And she goes, yes. But my sons brought me 3 beautiful daughters. So I liked that. And I can remember asking my doctor, because again, we didn't know the sex. I said, but you could tell, I think, by the heartbeat, the rate of the heartbeat of the child. And I said to him, what do you think, Dr. V? I think a boy. He was from Poland or whatever. And I said, ugh. So anyways, Donovan was born. And when he was born, he growled. He came out of me growling like this kind of sound, eh? And I didn't know that that was a big deal. I just thought, oh, I got a growler. And the next day the pediatrician comes in and she goes, well, you know, we were concerned about your baby, thinking he wasn't getting enough oxygen because he was growling, but he just seems to be a growler. So that was kind of cute. He growled for the first, till he could talk, I guess. That was his first vocalizations. But you were such a good little big brother. You always were very gentle and caring to him and proud of him. And you were a quiet player as well. Like you reminded me of myself when I was little. You played quietly with things and you weren't rambunctious, whereas Donovan had more energy and was more defiant. You were just, you know, I look back now and I feel like I was way too strict because you could have raised yourself and done a wonderful job. You were just that kind of personality, whereas Donovan needed more guidance and a firmer hand. And about that time, yeah, go ahead.
So this is just kind of a random anecdote about my life because I don't remember being a kid. But was I like an anxious kid?
Yes.
As I remember it? Like, I
Yes.
remember being probably approximately like 6 or 7. And I would lay in bed and I would like, now that I'm an adult, I realize they were panic attacks,
Yeah.
but I would just like freak out and start folding my blankets that I had control over something.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to
I have
be
a
like,
story about
you know,
that.
neurologically.
Yeah. When you were 3, you know, you take your child for public health nurse checkups, right? And she was doing a checkup on you. We used to have a little soother. I didn't care if you had a soother, you'd play and you had the soother. And you didn't talk much. And she said, he has to see a speech pathologist. And I came home, I said to Al, like he talks. Grandma was wild, but I did it. I took you to a speech pathologist and she goes, there's nothing wrong with his speech. He's an anxious child. And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, well, this testing I was doing with him, he has anxiety. She said, you should do something about that. And I said, what? She had no idea.
I think about that all the time because you see kids now that have like anxiety disorders and all this stuff, and like, yeah, I always say that like that just didn't exist in the '90s. You know what I mean? And
They
it's
didn't
funny.
recognize it, right?
And
But
in retrospect, good for me that they didn't, because you know what I mean. Like the
Yeah.
social norms pull you along to more constructive path in life.
Yeah.
And like I think that if I was accommodated for anxiety, like you know,
you wouldn't
I
have.
think that particularly like we're kind of going off the rails here,
Yeah.
but like joining the football team and you know forming the brotherhood that I did with so many people from different backgrounds
Yeah.
was huge for me. And if I was just indulged in my anxiety to be avoidant or anything, that in my life would be drastically different than it is now. So I think about that sometimes. Is that you know the sociological force is good to pull people along.
And one of the cute things about you that you did was you would say words, but they weren't quite right. Like garbage, you would call the boogage. And Philip, you call him fellow, which we thought was so cute. And Philip loved it too, that he was called fellow, right? And that was one of the really cute things for you. But you were always like brave. When you were 3 or 4, Is that how old he was when he jumped off the coffee table?
Phew.
And you broke your arm.
What, okay, so what an interesting kind of thing in my life is okay, now I've got my degree in kinesiology, I'm a licensed physiologist, all this stuff, right? And like when I go look back at my childhood, it's like Superman, Hercules.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
where did that come from?
Yeah, I don't know. And even for Halloween, like you had that little Superman costume, looked so cute, had muscles built in. It was perfect for you. It just fit you, it suited you. And then you were playing Spider-Man. You jumped off the end table there. And I wasn't at home. I must have been at work and you were at home. Because the way it worked with you guys, either I was home or Dad was home. You had very little childcare. Like Laura was for Donnie, mostly across the street, but mostly it was between me and Dad, and that was choices that we made to be home with our children, right? But I think I wasn't home and you fell, and you called, he was on the ambulance at the time to come look at it, but you were just sick. And you went in with Ben and they set your arm. And when they were setting it, you said, "Oh, that really hurts." That just tore Dad's heart up. But you were brave and you had your little cast on and
Walking Donnie over there.
yeah, because that's what brothers do, right? I saved that cast for years, but I finally threw it out because you'd had all these people sign it and stuff. Grandma and Grandpa looked after you guys if we needed help. But I didn't, because Mom and Dad had supported me and watched Sean so much, I really didn't want to have them be responsible for childcare. But we made a deal. I said, I will ask you, but you have to promise that if it doesn't work for you to watch the kids, you'll say no. And it worked out, and it was good. And Mom loved having you guys, especially after Dad went into the home and moved away. But Dad was much near, like when you got a little bit older, that's when his mind started to slip and he got rougher again. But he was much more patient with you guys than he ever was with us as kids.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting because I mean, I don't have a good memory in the first place, but I remember one time there was like a pillow on the floor and I was like, I'm not picking it up. And he dragged me across
By
the
your
house by
ear.
my ear. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when his mind
Yeah.
was starting to slip, and Mom was so upset about that she told me about it, and she just gave Dad a tongue lashing. You're never touching those kids again. And then, his mind really slipped after that. But yeah, I mean, we got the belt. Kids like Ed and Bernie got beat lots because they were very defiant, right? And that was parenting style then. I got a licking once. Tom got me in trouble and I got a licking. But I never, I was invisible kid, right, in that family. So, and not that I ever regret, that was just who I was.
It's interesting that you mentioned kind of me and Dawn not going to like Grandma and Grandpa's very much. Like then some of the fondest memories of my childhood, particularly like playing in her garden in the woods and stuff, and then goofing off in the basement in the small town there. And then those Sunday dinners kept continuing, and how the men would sit in the living room. And I was like 10 years old, and I'm like, I'm hanging out with the men. This is great.
Yeah, and the women were doing dishes and whatever. Yeah, no, I would say they went there maybe once a week. We went away on holidays or whatever, then you would stay there. Like in 2001, we went to Japan for Jeremy's wedding in October, and you guys went and stayed with Mom and Dad then for 10 days. That kind of thing. When we couldn't take you, then they went there. And Mom loved having you guys there to decorate the tree and have sleepovers. She could make milkshakes and popcorn for you guys, and she would ask for you to come. This was after Grandpa, became ill. But yeah, she loved having the four of you there, Allegra and Tamara and you and Dawn. That was, and Donovan's school, the community had a Halloween party there once. Mom and Dad loved and dressing up for Halloween and going around and drinking at friends' places and ha ha ha. Anyways, they had a little Halloween party there, and you were just like 2. And I had you in a little lion outfit, and Sean and Mom, Grandma were dressed up, and we went and did bobbing for apples and all of that kind of thing there. And yeah, whenever we took pictures, you guys would stand in front of that wall there, and you'd And that's where I'd take your picture. And Donnie, when you went to school, I remember we walked you to school, and this was in the fall, and you had your lunch, and he had to pack himself a little lunch too because he wanted to be like you. And you wore rubber boots. You liked your rubber boots. I don't know why, but he did too. So he'd wear his rubber boots, and we'd walk. I'd take the wagon. We'd walk up to school for you. And then he'd sit in the wagon and eat the snack on the way home. But he wanted to be like his big brother.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, that was cute. And of course, anything with the dad, I have pictures of you guys helping build the fence in the backyard. And Dad built a tree house for you guys to play in. And anything to do with Dad, you guys did, like fishing. You went fishing. You caught a fish. I haven't caught a fish. Camping, we loved camping and traveling with you guys. Do you remember the motor home?
Oh,
The murder home?
in
Yeah.
the blue van at Grandma's.
Oh yeah. That Mom and Dad loved that van. That was their retirement, their little travel van, and they had the little boat they'd put on top, and away they'd go camping. They just loved it. So yeah, those were really, really happy memories. Sean, he was a rough and tumble kid. Like I was telling him yesterday, it wasn't summer holidays if he didn't have a cast or stitches or something, because he would get hurt. You know, he was so, would it be adventurous would be the word? And he would end up getting hurt. And yeah, so his journey growing up was a little bit more difficult. He had, at the time, learning disabilities were somewhat recognized in school, but not hyperactivity. So he was sent to a special school in the city. He was bussed in and out for most of the time, of course. So he was sober for a year, and he took, through SIIT, he took his drug addiction counselor. And the first year he got a certificate, I think, and then he went for a second year, and it was a diploma. And he was so determined and focused. And I can remember him being so sick, like with a throat infection. I'm saying to him, you shouldn't go to school today. And he went. He never missed a day of school. He got shirts and everything for perfect attendance. And, you know, he did his practicum at Detox here in Saskatoon, and another one with Maxi, and then he got hired at Maxi's. And that was a very proud time for us. Very proud. And then, you know, 3 years later, he met Tawny and moved to PA.
Okay, so at this time, you're teaching the whole time, and always same grade?
I taught either split 4-5 or 5-6, but mostly grade 5.
Was that your choice?
It was where the job was, and then, like, because at first I thought I wanted to be a kindergarten or grade 1 teacher, but as my confidence grew, I really liked grade 5.
You know, like I've done a lot of coaching, and like, of course, all various ages, and that 10-11 age is such a fun age. They're like still goofy, but they're intelligent, and they're just really fun people to be around.
They're starting to figure out there's a world outside of themselves, and where do they fit in that world. I feel that's the age you can have a huge influence in their life.
Yeah.
And they're independent. They're not, you know, wipe my nose, tie my shoe. They're independent. It is a wonderful. I think I could have taught grade 7 and 8 as well. That whole span of figuring out who you are in that world is pretty fulfilling. Yeah. So, yeah, it was by choice by the end. I could have went to a different grade, and I didn't. So, yeah.
So how long did you teach for?
I taught 1996 was my first contract, and in 2013 I had to quit. So 96, 16, short of 20 years, about 20 years. By the time you put in all my subbing and my temporary contracts, it was 21 years I taught. So not the way I wanted my career to go. I wanted to retire like now And then I also had dreams of where teachers go to Africa and they help the educators there become competent teachers. And of course, Dad was supportive of me doing that, but I wanted to wait till my children were older, and then I didn't do it. But I was very involved in the Teachers Federation. I led workshops. I represented the teachers in our community. I know when I finished work, one of the teachers came to me and said, Donna, I always felt so safe when you were on staff. Because I don't think principals did it on purpose, ask you to do things that really, as a teacher, you shouldn't do. So when those situations would come up, I would say, no, that's not okay, that doesn't fall within our contract, or that's not ethical or professional or whatever. And the principals I had never questioned that, I think because they weren't as familiar with our contract as I was. I met monthly with other teachers in the school division. I mentored other teachers. I was awarded a teaching award nationally for teaching social studies. I was awarded provincial awards. Yeah.
So, tell me about your first day teaching and then how it transitioned over time. Because I'm not super familiar with the teaching world, but I know kind of around when I hit 5th grade, I think looking back on it, you were way ahead of your time.
Yes.
That's way ahead of it.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. I was. I had other teachers from other school divisions say that to me when I was parenting their children. I am grateful I had my first two principals gave me the freedom to teach the way I wanted to teach. I didn't fall into the old school way. So I can remember when I first started my job, there were this grade 1, 2, 3 teachers, and kindergarten were like an elite little group. And they didn't really talk to the grade 5 and 6 and 4 teachers. They were a group unto their own. And you dressed formally and you acted a certain way, and I didn't fit that. But I had a principal that allowed me to do things differently than the other teachers did. And at first I was kind of like, oh, you're a goofball, because I had class meetings, I had different forms of consequences, that sort of thing. But then as time rolled on, it was like I was being recognized for running a cooperative classroom or for teaching a different way. And then all of a sudden those teachers started talking to us. But the grade 4, 5, and 6 teachers were new on staff. And so we kind of clung together. And then the old school teachers, there was an age gap, right? There was us young ones coming in, and then there was the old school teachers with the grade 1, 2, and 3. So that was different. Yeah. So versus now, I see that I had at the elementary school, there's a whole bunch of new teachers. I had one of them was teaching grade 4, come and ask for information on a couple of things, ways that I ran my classroom. I haven't taught for 10 years. And I went, oh, sure, I can give you information. Because I want to do this, she said, and I heard you do that. You did that. And I went, yeah. Even the report cards, the way I did report cards and the way I did parent-teacher interviews was different than everybody else. And which is standard protocol now for the way teachers do interviews.
Where did you get that from? Was that just the new way that you learned at university, or did you kind of
it was
trial and error? Or?
Yeah, it was my thing, right? It was my personality. So I took extra classes in that kind of area, and so that's the way I did it. I always had a desire for special ed to help the kids that had difficulties learning, and so I implemented, I didn't think that it should just apply for one student. I applied it class-wide. If it's going to help one, it's going to help more. That was just kind of my nature. I wanted to get my degree as a teacher and then become a speech pathologist. And the school for speech pathology is in Alberta or the States. And I wasn't too sure how I was going to swing that, right? Because I'm married now, but Dad was supportive. But then when I started teaching, I really loved it. So I thought, not going to do speech pathology. But all my classes were in that special ed area, right, of reading and speech and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Okay, 2013 through to 2023.
Well, I, at the time, was wanting to go into business. Dad and I had a dream that I would retire and we would have a care home, and that would supplement our income, because that would give, I was thinking I'd retire in like 10 years, and that by that time the care home would be established and that we'd be rolling in the money, right? But a part of it is also that when my dad went into a nursing home, that was devastating for the family. And I promised myself I would not do that to my mom. And I thought she would be able to come live with us and that would be grand. But when her mind started to go, she became adversarial. And I couldn't. I mean, I knew I was the child that was closest to her and that she would listen to, but my mom was never adversarial to me before, and to have her like that was very difficult. So when she went into the home in the city, that was a big fight between the two of us, and I reminded her, she had made me promise when my Baba was sick and needed to go in a home. She didn't want to go in a home, she fought Mom. And Mom said, if I ever get to that point, you just remind me of my mom. And I had to do that. And she's so strong though. And I said to her, Mom, you told me to do this.
I'm sorry, I'm actually here to put you in a home right now. Just kidding.
You what?
I'm here to put you in a home right now.
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
no.
let's go.
We did talk to her. Actually, Sue and I, she knew she needed help, right? And she was, we'd get meals brought in. She would only eat part, leave it out. We didn't know if it was good. We had a nurse come in to make sure she was taking her meds. She refused that. We tried everything we could to keep her in the apartment in Saskatoon, but she was still failing. So she went to this assessment program. It was called the GEM program. For a couple of months, they did all these tests, and then they called the family in and they said, okay, your mom's got vascular dementia, and they showed us MRI or a CAT scan of her brain, and there were all these black holes. And they said, she can't do this, she can't do that, she needs care. So we all as a team, okay, Mom needs care. What are we going to do? And Mom was there for that, like all of us siblings, and Mom was there for that interview. But how much she retained, I don't know. So Sue and I and Kathy took Mom to different care homes. We got her name on some, but when there was an opening, they would phone Mom and she'd go, oh, I'm not ready yet. Well, it got to the point where she needed to be ready. I would go in and stay overnight there sometimes, I don't know if you remember that, and stay with her just to try to make sure she was eating, and because she was hiding money in clothes, she was getting very vulnerable. So we found this care home, Sue and I did, and it was nice. So as kids, Mom's gonna go on home, and I told her we're going into a home. She was so mad. And that's when I told her about Baba. But all of my siblings came in, they helped pack up Mom's stuff, clean up her apartment. When it was time for the move, Bernie took her for a drive while we moved the furniture she needed to the care home. And then Bernie brought her there and we got her settled. And then we would all visit at different times of the day or evening to make sure she was being cared for. And there were a few times I called the ambulance. But the manager of the care home was a woman I went to school with and I knew really well. So one nurse was not taking well care of Mom. I had to call the ambulance, blah, blah, blah. She called me fat, it was bad, so I talked to the care home manager, that person was fired. But the minute Mom went into that home was the minute we got plans to build the care home here. So,
So at that time, like, why a care home as opposed to something else? Like, was it you were looking at businesses just in general and then this
No,
kind of showed
no,
up?
I never
Or-
wanted my own business, Dad did.
Okay.
But this was a way I could make sure my mom was cared for. If she couldn't live with me, I was gonna build her a place where she was gonna be safe and well cared for. So, Ed agreed to build it. I got the town to give me the lot on a bit of a deal where if I was open for 5 years, I didn't have to pay for the lot. I got money from Clarence Campo Development Fund, which is a Métis development fund that helped get me a down payment, and the rest of the mortgage came from the credit union. And then we put in, I think, 50,000 of equity from this house. And Ed built the house. So I'd always tell Mom, this is the house that Love built, Mom. Your son Ed made it. I own it. And you live here. You're the Panya. So when it opened, I hired people not by their piece of paper. I said, I will train you how I wanted. I wanted hire you for your caregiving, your personality, right? And so I paid for their training, for their care training, their first aid, their food safe courses. I paid for that. And I paid them a little bit above minimum wage. And at the same time that I opened, so I started the care home. At the same time, Mom needed care. Carolyn's dad had a stroke, and her mom was showing pretty severe signs of dementia. And she was quite disabled from arthritis. So they moved in at the same time as Mom. And that was such a blessing. I spent every night there, and Mom got very active during the night, so lots of times I was in there looking after her. And I had various, any way to make money. So I rented rooms to men that worked construction and they were upstairs, and that worked out really well. They bonded with the residents, they bonded with my staff. The ones that worked out, they stayed. The ones that wanted a rowdier life, they moved on. I did respite care. I had several women in for different respite times. But about this time, that's when my health started to fail. And I was open a year, and by this time, my mom was on oxygen, and her ability to eat and just move around was severely handicapped. She needed more care than I could provide. So then again, another family meeting, and Tom worked in the health region in nursing homes, and he was a union rep, so he recommended 2 care homes. So we put Mom on the list, and Mom went to Oliver Lodge, which was, very, very, she got good care, and that's where she ended up dying. The Thomases, they offered to buy the business, but the person that they wanted to hire to run it didn't have the confidence to do it. So I had to close it and sell it. And I had several offers on it, but it took a year. It took a year, and I did sell it to another person that opened it as a care home. But our community needed that care home for many of the elderly people that lived in the community, because I didn't think it was right that they needed to leave where they had lived 50 or plus years to live in a city where they were not familiar, where they wouldn't get the visiting. So I really believed in the whole, it wasn't just about my mom, but it was a service to the community. I really believed that there would be people that needed it, and now it's closed. And as far as my health, when I first got sick, I just wanted a pill and my life back to get better. I just didn't understand why this was happening to me. I spent the first year crying, feeling sad for myself. And then, there was a lightning moment, and I know you don't like this story, but it was a turning point for me. And you came home from school or work or whatever, and you said, I'm sick of this. You're sitting, you're watching Dr. Phil, you're feeling sorry for yourself, you have to do something. And that's when I went, oh, okay. And so it took me 3 years to get diagnosed with all the things. I had lots of misdiagnoses, MS, lupus. Grateful I don't have any of that. And it's been a journey. It's been a real journey defining who I am outside of mother, teacher, grandma. I had to discover things I liked. I had to develop a social life independent of my husband. It was very difficult to learn to lean on my husband, whereas I'd always been independent and he'd always supported that. And to have to be dependent on him for care was very difficult, but he stepped up like a tramp. And then I found that the pills weren't doing it. I was still hurting. I was still not able to do things. I did try to return to work. I didn't make it till Christmas. And they gave me everything I wanted. 2-hour jobs, special ed every other day. Still couldn't do it. That's when I accepted I couldn't teach anymore. Not before that. And that was 7 years ago. And then just in the past year, I went to my doctor and I said, I'm still in pain. I'm on hydromorph. I'm on all these meds. And he said, I don't know what to do. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not coming back. I said, I hope I don't hurt your feelings, but I'm not coming back. And I came home and it took me 3 months, but I detoxed from all the meds, all the painkillers with Sean's guidance about how to decrease the doses. And I started reading a book from a naturopath that I'd gotten years before about how to eat healthy and change my life. So now I manage my pain with acupuncture every 3 weeks, with diet and exercise. And I feel as good or better than when I was on the medication. We didn't even sleep together, except for once a month. Sue would come down and stay, I always called it Sue's room, stay in the room and sleep there so I could be at home. But night care was important to me. Lots of care homes don't have night care, but I knew that Mom was active at night. And also there were things going on with Mrs. Thomas I needed to, kind of keep an eye on and stuff. So night care was really important. Lots of times Mom was looking for cigarettes or, I don't know, whatever else. She'd be digging around in her closet and stuff. So, yeah.
Okay. Now it's 2023. Mm-hmm. What's next?
I continue to research how to heal my body with food, and I continue my crafting quilts. I really love that, and my book club and going to church, and when we can, we travel. I'm content with a quiet life. That's where I want to be, with Dad doing things around here.
And that's a wrap.
Yeah, and my grandchildren and kids, of course.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.